join us. Professor Evelyn Moore is at Washington University at St. Louis. She is the PI on many research grants. She's an innovator. She's a Nigerian. She's really a remarkable human being, and we're delighted to have her today talk to us about innovation. So without further ado, over to you, Professor Evelyn Moore.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes. Okay. All right, so I'm gonna try to see if I can start the video. Okay. And I'm gonna share screen. So good morning, everyone. Give me a second to pull up the slides. All right. Can you see it yet?
Not yet.
Okay. Better now?
Yep, we can see it now.
All right. All right. So I guess I can't see most people, but I'm guessing people are joining from everywhere. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. And thank you, Joe, for that wonderful introduction. It's always a pleasure to speak about grant writing, particularly the NIH version. So I'm guessing everybody's using the NIH approach, right, Joe?
Exactly. That's the template. Yep.
Yeah, because that's what I'm more versed with. And so I share all this, and I like to share it as a disclaimer because there are other types of grant writing. And so, NIH isn't the only way. There are other ways, and but sometimes, like we always say, what you learn from NIH is often applicable. I say that because I also write other types like National Science Foundation grants, and those are not the most easy. In particular, NSF would ask for broader impacts, for example, which can be almost close to innovation. So there are certain things that I'm using interchangeably from other experiences, but at the end of the day, most of my experiences are very much the NIH way. And so without further ado, we're going to talk about, so today, what we will do in the next couple of minutes is, talk about innovation, definitions that exist, and just try to think through that in terms of what we're doing to apply our version of the innovation sections of our grant. We're also going to talk about some types, drivers, some themes that come across when people talk about innovation, what are they saying? We're going to review a little bit of the NIH criteria for innovation, and then, your turn, apply some of that to what you may be doing for your grant proposal, and then close out with some lessons learned over the years with writing innovation. By way of background, I am a grant writer. I took that title on myself 2022 after a year of, it was a year. That was a year that I think I wrote my most grant ever. And it dawned on me that there is something called grant writing and how that is just as distinct as poetry or storytelling or prose writing or essay writing. It is a skill set that you can learn and you can practice over time. Most people are not born grant writers. So you do learn that skill set over time. And so over the years, and I've done this over 16 years now, what I found or what I've learned about myself is that I have failed more than I have succeeded. So take everything I'm sharing here with a grain of salt, because clearly my failure rate is quite high. Of course, the successful rates are wonderful and people know about them, but really it's the ones that many of you will never know about that inspires me actually to want to be better in terms of the work that I do. But perhaps most significant in terms of, if I said 2022 was my defining year, one of the things I learned about that year, or just get into that year, was The Artist Way. And I don't know if many of you read the book, The Artist Way. I highly recommend it. I think it was written in the 70s or 70s. And one thing it emphasizes is this need to write, grant writing, like I said, is the same thing as fiction writing, the same thing as all sorts of writing. And the most crucial thing is that you have to write. And so since the pandemic began, I have been writing streams of consciousness. Some of it makes sense, some of it doesn't make any sense, but the key is that I write. Because when I do that, I'm better able to then focus a little bit more on the scientific writing. And so the artist way will also says that you sort of have to write and let it out. You don't have to show it to the world. I choose to show mine in the way of a blog. But you can just constantly write and just let it out, because once you do that, you get a better sense of clarity with where you're heading to. And then there's no other form of writing that needs that more than grant writing. Now you got to be clear. Reviewers don't have to. I'm a reviewer too. We really are busy, extremely busy. And so I need to know that your innovation makes sense from the beginning and not years later, because I don't have that time. So, when I meet people and they tell me they want to write grant, I say, okay, I'm always like, what's great about it or what's new about it? And you got to sell it quick and not 10 pages later. So keep that in mind, that the more you write, the better you get at it over time. And my journey is one where, if I was a student with my first grant, the first picture where I was doing malaria work as an F-31 predoctoral funded scholar, I think that grant was probably 23,000. So I was very proud of it. It's still, when obviously that was my first foray into this world. By the time I connected with Joe and we wrote this one, and I'll share a little bit about it towards the end, on innovative tools to expand youth-friendly HIV self-testing, it was 6.4, and at that point, 6.4 million. And at that point, this was my third grant as a principal investigator. So, there's no route to it. I think you just have to get, write and write and write, and your trajectory will be different. But the key is that you will write. So in between that 23,000 to 6.4 million, I have a lot of failure. And that's why you see that failure rate that is very high. There's a lot of failure that again, the world will never know. But I know of them because I wrote them and I failed. And maybe one day I might resurrect. In fact, these days I tell myself I need to resurrect some of them because they were really good ideas that just wasn't, in my opinion, they just wasn't at the right time for maturation. And so who knows, I might be resurrecting some failed ideas, but there is that. And it's important to start there, because the one thing I never want people to leave out with grant writing is that you write your first one and you get it. That's not the journey. That's not the trajectory. I'm sure Joe and many other speakers that are going to be speaking will share their own story. So it's important to know that it's a lot of trial. It's a lot of success, of course, but it's a lot of failures as well. And so I strongly recommend keeping a failure resume and be proud of it as you go along, because it helps tell your story. So innovation defined. Again, the same thing with just idea of grant writing. Oftentimes people take it as a linear approach. There's an idea and somehow it's going to have impact. And yes, somehow you get innovation. And so people are very passive when they think about that section of the NIH grant. It is a score driving point. It's actually one of the most easiest if you actually take the time to think of how you go from your idea to ultimately its impact, because that's what NIH wants, right? That if we're going to give you money, it's not just money that makes your CV looks good, but it's money that makes an impact in people's lives. And so how do you go from there's an idea all the way to impact and not just be passive about it? Truth of the matter is it's going to go in this very jagged process. How you go from idea to innovation to impact is not straight lined. It's not easy. It is full of yeah, you write it, you erase, you start all over again, you write it, you erase, you start all over again, and you're like, why did I even begin? And you may not even see impact. I want to be, honest, because a lot of us engage in research waste, not, maybe not you, but the reality is 50% of work, I believe, never lasts. And so that is research waste by definition. The fact that you're going to do work that never leads to impact, of what use is that, especially when funds have been spent. And so, yeah, the journey is not straightforward. It does require endurance, grit, perseverance, just this tenacity to really want to make a difference, but understanding that it's trial and error and you just have to keep at it. Joe, do we get to ask questions as we go along, or just you save that till the end?
It's if you want to take some of the questions in the Q&A box, that's totally fine. But
Okay.
it's usually it's up to you. You can take them
Okay.
along the way, or you can do it at the end. Either way.
Okay, perfect. So as you have questions, please feel free to bring them along, and because I want to make sure this is as interactive as possible. Definitions abound. I think everybody has a definition that they feel they're more passionate about, that they care about. And just in reviewing the literature, for something else I was doing a while back, these are some that I liked. I mean, I don't think there's any right or wrong way to view them, but the fact that it's an act of insight, the act of insight that many people just often maybe stumble upon, but they do that while they're doing something in practice is one that is important, because you got to be purposeful in your search for innovation. You can't just expect change to just show up. And so Peter Drucker is, one of the fathers of the discipline of innovation. He would say that, you want to really take the time to search for those opportunities and be purposeful and diligent or disciplined about it, because that's how you then get change. Parent will say it's just novel ways of doing things better or differently. Kelly, them people over at IDEO will say that it's about the people who then create value through implementation of ideas. So it's not enough to have an idea if it doesn't impact people's lives, and if it's that the people are not working to create value. Anthony, in his little book of innovation, would say it is something different. So there's this idea of it's something different, alternate, that creates value, and showing and trying to understand innovation behaviors, that it's just that active process of wanting to create, introduce, or apply new ideas. And so, like I said, there's no right or wrong definition. I think you just have to figure out what works for you and the work you're doing, and understand that it might involve, something that is new, something that is, of course, different, something that is always doing something that impacts people's lives. And so what are some types? And there's no right or wrong way in terms of types. But the Tide paper gives a sort of a 4 Ps of innovation. And he would say that, it begins with, process. So a lot of people say it's the journey. It's the journey to us having that innovation that is important. Some would say, yes, the product. And many of you know an innovative product when you see it. Some would argue is a position, where what sort of the things you're changing about a thought or an idea, and sort of how you stand firm in being the first to do that. Ultimately, it's also a paradigm change. How are you really changing paradigm? And so if you think of process, what I said earlier, sorry, this was a mistake. But anyways, what I said earlier about idea and impact, that matters. And then when you think of product, iPhones, that's a crucial one in terms of what everybody knows as an innovative product. When you think of innovation types, the position people may take, Androids versus Apple users, that's important. Or when you think of paradigms, telephone, how we move from landlines to actual phones, that's important. And other types of innovation, particularly from Clay Christensen, his work on disruptive innovations or radical innovation, would say, especially think of things that are sustaining. So think of things that are enduring, things that are disruptive. So if you think of, I don't know if many of you grew up with Blockbuster, and how Blockbuster and Netflix never saw eye to eye, but today there's no Blockbuster, but Netflix remains. So new technologies that come in to disrupt existing markets is important. I'm thinking of the work of I'm going to forget her name. She did a lot on public health in terms of some of the disruptive innovations we ought to be thinking about for the work we do. Incremental is important because it's a gradual process of continuous improvement or existing products and services, and obviously radical, those breakthroughs that are change, that are very different, are important for the work we do. And so when you think of drivers, COVID is an important version in terms of when you think of a driver. It was a grand challenge. Almost all of us had to address this wicked problem that was complex and urgent. There were a bunch of collaborative efforts towards getting us that vaccine. There were very few lone wolf geniuses. Everybody was working together to ensure that we co-create the value, right? So it's not just having the vaccine, but how do you get it to the end user? And so people were trying to create ideas in terms of tapping into user knowledge and experiences. And so many things failed, just the struggle with wearing masks in the beginning, the struggle with washing hands and using hand sanitizers until it became a norm, you know. So those are some drivers that typically force people to think through what is innovation for the types of work that they're doing. Ultimately, some themes that then cuts across is this idea of it being something new, right? So you're going to hear that often. Innovation is something new, the conscious search for something new, focused, purposeful change. The other thing that people often forget about innovation is that learning, right? And you can see that in a little bit in some of the Clay Christensen's work, this idea of it's gradual, it's continuous, you're improving, it's incremental. It might seem low, but there's a process that is occurring that is making you learn. And in that learning, you know, ideas come up. I don't know if most of you may know the story of Post-it, right? Silver, I think is his name, was working on an adhesive for something else and found something that was actually weak and not what he was looking for. But then through a process of a bunch of trial and error, just being that even open to learn, you have Post-its notes today. And so that openness is crucial. And in terms of how you're going to do something different for the work you're thinking of, and ultimately, does it have value? I think, you know, of what use is some of the work you're doing if it really is just for your CV. I think you're better off serving humanity by not even doing the work. And so your work should really be in service of people, in service of systems, health systems, community systems, in service of societies, countries, nations. You know, because, you know, a lot of the public health challenges of our times are grand, they're wicked. They do need urgent solutions. And so it matters that we're doing work that is not just in service for ourselves, but in service of so many other people. All right. And so then that takes us to the NIH, you know, NIH being one of the largest funders, I think $40 billion is their portfolio. I'm guessing it, the PRIDE program has given you a sense of the portfolio of NIH. You can never go wrong with writing a public health grant, a clinical trial grant, any grant related to health. You can never go wrong with writing the NIH way. And like I said, innovation is a score driving point. So not only are you scored on what's significant about your work, who your investigators are, so like the collaborative nature of your work, but you are definitely scored on the innovation. And some questions, and so if you look through a bunch of R01s or a bunch of grants that are available now, these are some of the questions that reviewers are being told to pay attention to when they think of innovation section. You know, that the fact that that paradigm question comes in, it'll be changing, challenging, shifting, current paradigm, using things that are new, and it could be theory, it could be concepts, it could be approaches, it could be your methods, it could be interventions. If you're not changing, if you're not shifting, if it's not a practice that is new, then we're wasting time. And then with that too, then comes the learning. Like I said, there's a need to be open these days with the learnings that we're taking, with the work we do. And so maybe you're taking a concept to another level, right? In a new way, and maybe in that process get to learn, you know, some methods, some instruments, some interventions that would then be broad in a sense, you know, in other words, you know, be upfront about the learning that would occur. It's been a rare example of something, even though we've done it this way before, but if you fund me, we get to learn about some other way of doing it. I think that matters. And you know, this was another interesting one that I've seen very recently in a bunch of clinical trials. So if some of you here are designing interventions, this question, the one on impact, is a big one now. You know, and you know, I never had it. If you saw my former slides on innovation, I never actually had this question until I started looking, you know, so this idea of whatever your elements are for innovation, you know, is it going to enhance sensitivity? Is it going to have information that advances knowledge? So we don't want knowledge for the sake of knowledge anymore, but really how impactful will it be for the field, for the practice as a whole? Okay. And so Jill, I took the liberty of taking your example, Grant. I don't know if you've shared it in this class before, but here is a sample innovation. I think perhaps one of my favorites. I think this grant, I don't know if you get to give them sample grants, Jill, But I don't know if I've also told you that this probably is one of my favorite grants ever to read, for its simplicity, for its just sheer use of words, just clean, and um it's a masterclass for me. Every time I see that grant, Joe, I'm always like, yeah, this is how you do it. From your first sentence all the way till the last, it's tight, it's clean, it's concise. It is publicly available knowledge. I think there's a protocol, publicly available. You can see the grant on NIH Reporter, because this is published. But that innovation section, the fact that this is an innovation in content and methodology, right? So he didn't mince words. He was clear that this is going to be innovation in content and methodology. And then the fact that he kept on using FIRST, we're the first to use crowdsourcing to enhance HIV testing and linkage to promotion. So quickly you see, we're going to learn something new about how are you going to use crowdsourcing for HIV testing and linkage. All right. And so again, we're the first. This time around, social marketing exists, but we're going to be the first to improve it for HIV testing and linkage using a multi-quasi-experimental trial. So it's not the fact that quasi-experimental trial has existed for a long time before Joe's work. Social marketing too has existed before Joe's work, but the fact that he gets to pair social marketing with HIV, which quasi-experimental makes this new and exciting, and you're like, all right, cool, no problem, what else? And so then this is where the learning begins. So previous people, right? So, the part of that learning is that you really want to be clear about what others have done. So and this is part of the NIH grant that is really focused on the rigor of prior research. And see how deftly he put that there. Previous people have focused on policy information, gives you, references, surveillance, without specifically investigating testing or linking. So it's not that social marketing hasn't been done. It's not that even crowdsourcing, like he said, hasn't been done. But what we're going to do now is something rare that is focused on testing and linkage now among key populations outside of a high income setting, right? First intervention focused on young adult MSMs. And then another thing about learning, nearly all again have focused on single sites, but we get to measure linkage. And then maybe perhaps the fact that social media was in full proliferation at that time, online forums too, we get to really have a better sense of impact than in a middle income country. And I think that learning, the newness, the impact is really some of the things you want to remember about your approach to innovation. And you want to do that in a sticky way. I love this Chip and Dan Heath's book, Bait to Stick. The idea that you want to be simple. I can't emphasize this enough. There's nothing like being simple, using simple core phrases that people are, like I said, if you see Joe Stin, he was clear. We're innovation in content and methodology, and then we're first in using Christ. So don't use first if you're not first though. So make sure you're using first in the right sense of the word, and be simple as you use it. This is you see this. I mean, we can count the sentence: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 14 words. 14 words were used to emphasize the fact that this was the first. Some people, when they write their sentence, oh my God, we're going into like 30 words and we still don't even know what the innovation is. Sometimes in another project that I do, I try to tell my students to write innovation in 6 words or less. And that takes some guts. I don't think I'd have it here. But that takes some guts to tell people to really think of your innovation in 6 words or less. Because if you can't think of it in a simple, short, concise way, then is it innovative, or are you just wasting or blowing air? And he used 14. I think 12 to 14 is good. Don't overdo it. And you can see the same over and over where the sentences are short. Even if you do add, right, you're adding in a way of extending knowledge. You're adding a way of extending learning, such that everything at the end of the day connects. And so grant writing, like I would say, then it's not just you have the ideas. It's also the cleanliness, the clarity, unusual clarity that you put towards how you put those words together, so that it flows with the new knowledge that will come out, the new learning that will come out, the impact that will come out. I came to like poetry. It's very short and concise, the better overall. And so, made to stick would say, try to use credible, so if you see again, Joe, he had his references there in piece, just to let you know he's really thought through some of these ideas for the work he's doing. He was concrete. You don't have to use stories, obviously. Some people do, but you don't, it would take a miracle for stories to really be the helm of some of these grants, right? But I think the possibilities are there. But think of unexpected, think of credible, think of stories if you can put it together, emotional phrases, simple. I think at the end of the day, if you remember nothing, try to be simple such that your idea of what your innovation is sticks. Here's another one. This one was with a group when I was doing a lot of hypertension, which I still do. When I was working with Benga Gdebe's team over in Ghana a couple of years ago, where we were trying to study hypertension, and this time taking his tax shifting strategies to community settings in Ghana. The idea of it at that time, this was really in the beginning phases of implementation science per se, taking it then. So we were moving from clinical effectiveness trials now to truly late stage 4 clinical trials at that time. And so at that point, this was one of the new interventions to really want to bring CIFA, which I'm sure some of you in the implementation world may know, and REAIM together, and then use that to test effects as an intervention. We were interested in, so how do you combine that, and can you combine that then to study an implementation outcome such as an adoption? We wanted to look at critical gaps. Everybody says you should pay attention to that late stage 4 translation, particularly in an LMIC setting that doesn't have healthcare workers. And so it was important for us to understand, really, as we put this together, are we going to be able to learn those gaps over time? Policy was a big one for us. And so imagine, we were clear that this work would have impact for national policy when it comes to those barriers to hypertension, be it at the systems provider or patient. It would also have, relevance when you think of impact at community level, impact with stakeholders, which is often not what you see when you think of hypertension control, which is typically, at least in the days we were writing, is in the domain of a clinical setting. And now we were taking it to community settings. So there were new things that would come out of there, which we were proud to say. There were learning that would occur, which we were proud to say, and ultimately there were impact that we knew people will achieve. And so I'm going to spend the next couple of minutes now pausing and say your turn. Given what you've heard now, the fact that they're drivers, they're types, ultimately, you want to be thinking new, you want to be thinking the learning, because of what uses work if you are not enjoying. If it's, your work should never be disappointing to you. It should be something you do with delight. And so I think innovation is that space where you begin to reintegrate joy and delight into this idea that you feel is going to really be of impact to people. And so think of the newness of your work, think of the learning that you think you want to gain, and think of impact. And let's try to come up with as many ideas. And I put 5 minutes, but we can extend. But try to, take a piece of paper, come up with as many ideas as possible. Just start writing them down. Don't think yet of what they may be. It's in the end that I want you to then think of, well, which of those ideas are new? Which of them is forcing you to learn? Which of them do you feel is impactful? Is that something we can do? Yay, nay? I don't think we
Yes,
can.
definitely. It is a webinar format, so people
Okay.
could I think people could put their answers into the Q&A. But I think,
Okay.
like I said, if they jot down 4 or 5 things, give
Okay.
people minutes, and then they choose like what's the most innovative and either put it into the Q&A, or I think that sounds good.
All right. So I'm going to time it and begin. Please take a piece of paper. And I try to help you cheat sheet, feel free to use this. But I don't like to really share, because I want you to always think of it for your own self. But if we use the Joe format, proposed study is new and different, because proposed study is a rare example of, this is the first study that will, so you can think of what makes it new and different. Is it new and different in the content and methodology? Is it a rare example of, is the study will do this? I think if we can spend the next 5 minutes, and I'm going to hopefully pray that some of you will come on board and talk. Um, we'll see how that goes. So begin. I don't have good music, but maybe I can, ah, we'll just be quiet.
Get some Jeopardy music. Um,
Yeah.
do we maybe people put it in once they're done, you can put it in the Q&A and then we can elevate people to panelists, select a few people and elevate them to panelists and talk about it. Does that sound feasible, Yusha?
Yes. Well, at least for
Mm,
me, yes.
yes, I think so.
Okay, great.
I'm gonna step out quickly to get my charger. I think my laptop may die soon, so I'm still here. All right, so we have about a minute to go. All right. All right. Are there anybody that wants to take a stab at what they think is innovative about their work and we can use here? You know, did you come up with ideas? If so, what were those ideas? What made you feel as though those ideas felt new? What learning, if any, has occurred and potential impact? And Joe, did you have your hands up?
No, sorry.
Feel free to put it in the chat, and I guess I could also look in the chat now. Okay. All right. And Anifiok Udoakan, sorry if I butchered the name. Could I throw more light on aspect that one may not even see impact? Do you mean at the point of ideation, writing, or trying to bridge the gap? I think at the point of implementation is what I meant. The fact that, you know, when people tend to do this work, they have all sorts of ideas. They even do implement the ideas, but funding mechanisms, just even the process of how we do this work, never occur long enough to see impact. And so it does take time. It does take years for you to see impact over time. And so how do you build a bridge of work that isn't just one time shot and you leave? Like, how do you extend the continuation of the life cycle of the work so that you're able to see innovation over years, over time, is what I was trying to say there. Julian Lee says the study, do you want to read what you have?
For sure. Thank you for the opportunity. So my name is Chuan Li, and my proposed study is about really understanding the preference over HIV testing among international migrants in China, and how we can use crowdsourcing strategies to co-develop or co-create intervention strategies with them. So the innovation points or ideas I'm thinking of, first of all, the study will be one of the first of this kind because very few studies have been done to really actively engage international migrants communities with multilingual backgrounds in terms of developing community-friendly HIV testing services in China. And the study would be new and different because in Chinese setting, because this was one of the first to use DCE or discrete choice experiment survey to understand their preferences, because previous studies have been mainly in Australia or the Europe, like high income countries. And the impact I'm thinking about, because after the COVID-19 era, I feel like people are super anxious about the control of infectious diseases among migrant communities. So I feel like this can be like translated to other areas as well.
I like
thank
that.
you.
No worries. So I see first, I mean, you want to be proud of that first, especially when you're doing it, be it in your content is what I'm seeing here, and be it in your methodology. It's what I'm also seeing here. Your content or your content or your context being international migrants. The fact that we've never done anything like this before makes this innovative, and you're going to be the first to do that. And then the fact that you get to use discrete choice experiments to try to understand what has typically been ignored for them is important. And then ultimately impact. You know, we want to get a better sense. I mean, the pandemic is still ongoing. We need to have a better sense of how we do control infectious diseases beyond the pandemic. And so, you know, that impact cuts across for so many people that are, you know, trying to still understand the many lessons of COVID. And I think, you know, you kind of hit it on there. There's new knowledge in the form of content, new knowledge in the form of methodology, and then obviously learning. Like you said, you know, people have done it differently, but they've not necessarily actively engaged these migrants from different backgrounds in your setting, right? It's typically done in high income settings, Australia, Europe, but not in China. And so that kind of learning would be helpful overall. So I think you hit it on the nail. You know, only thing I would say is practice to reduce sentencing as much as you can to keep it short and clean. But I think the idea of the newness, the learning, the impact is there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you for the very helpful feedback.
No worries. Gifty, do you want to come talk about yours?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah. Nice to meet you.
Okay. Nice to meet you too, and thank you very much for the presentation. So my study is basically looking at developing a teleprep program for youths among gay, bisexual, and other men who have sex with men here in China. And in terms of innovation, I think this is the first study that is seeking to develop a teleprep program specifically in China. The first prep demonstration program in China was just held recently, and it's yet to even be completed. So this is already expanding on the prep program concept for China. And then secondly, our aim to have features of the app of the teleprep program that spans from HIV risk assessment all the way to the treatment tracking, as in prep adherence, kind of bridges the gaps that already exist in other teleprep program where they just combine some digital aspects to in-person aspects. So this one just spans like across digitizing the whole prep care cascade. And the third, in terms of our methodology, our use of the hackathon, which is a crowdsourcing approach, is new and innovative because it has not been used in the development of teleprep program or prep programming specifically in China yet. And in terms of impact, being able to do this successfully is going to help bridge some of the gaps that persist in terms of barriers to in-service, in-facility service utilization for GBMSM here in China.
Yeah. No, it's, I mean, you got it. You know, the fact that it's going to be new, you know, prep exists, but maybe it's not tailored to the needs of Chinese GBMSM. And so the fact that you get to create something new and different for them in particular would be good. The fact that you also have something new by way of methods, right? You have something new where we get to learn through hackathon, where we get to learn in the bottom-up way, right? To really build out the innovation with the end user right there with you, not as an afterthought, but as your partner and leader. We get to learn from that process. There's also another part that makes it quite innovative. And then the fact that, you know, the fact that we don't even have a process of engaging maybe Chinese GBMSMs in maybe co-creating interventions, maybe even ensuring that we are we're targeting our prep services to their needs is impactful. Because if we want to get to that, you know, age-free generation for everybody, not some people, for everybody, we're going to need to take their needs and their experiences into consideration. And that helps also drive sort of why fund this study, because of the potential impact for the knowledge, potential impact for the methods that would also be used. So thank you. I think this is helpful. It gets better over time. Again, the same thing I would say is try to reduce sentencing. It's wordsmithing. And it's not something we teach a lot, but reviewers like that. And so, you know, the shorter the sentences are, the better overall. But the idea in terms of the newness, in terms of the learning, in terms of the learning, talk about the delight the two of you had with explaining your work. The learning is clearly there, and you already feel yourself changing, right, as you're putting this together. And that's what innovation should do. There should be something new and something different that not only your participants are gaining, but hopefully you are as well. Like you're being changed in the process as well. And hopefully then connected to the broader goal of why we're all even in this field as a whole. And, you know, because like I said, if all you're doing is just doing work for your CV, that's good, but it's not helpful in the long run. And so thinking through how your work connects to the broader impact of things is always good. Okay, thank you everyone. And for those I didn't get to hear, my email address is there. Feel free to share as your ideas come together. So then lessons learned, and I don't know if Joe gets to share a little bit about the work we do, which is this For Youth by You project, which was the work that I shared, I think in the beginning of the slides, if I go all the way to the beginning, this work, right? This work, the innovative tools to expand youth-friendly HIV self-testing, the fact that that work really, at least for my end of things, that work began after a string, and I mean a string of failures in trying to permeate the NIH world. But eventually we did it in such a way that we were extending crowdsourcing, but this time taking it, you know, to the realms of design-a-thon, taking it to the realms of pilot testing, taking it to the realms of innovation boot camps, and then ultimately a clinical trial. The fact that we didn't want an intervention that was just for young people that young people didn't actually build. And so we were the young people, whether they be the implementers, the ambassadors, a research steering committee, all sorts of local stakeholders. The fact that we didn't want to build an intervention that wasn't connected to the end user was crucial. There was also a plan to learn, you know, that thing about learning is, you know, that openness to learn and being able to say, I may not have all the, as much as I'm the expert, I actually may not have all the answers. And so maybe I get to learn from young people, right, who are already resourceful and resilient in terms of change. The willingness to change, you know, nobody, you know, as much as seasons come and go, fall, winter, spring, you know, how much less your research. And so the fact that research can be very rigid and not willing to change doesn't help innovation. I think, you know, like I said, with the post-it note, it wasn't the inventors didn't set out to make post-it notes. They adapted along the way, and boom, we got post-it. I think every innovation is really that, you know, just a willingness to change and ultimately nurturing core values, things that make that, you know, impact, that work impactful, not again for yourself, but the greater good, society, systems that you feel as though you're working with. And so that is our work, you know, as for Youth by Youth. It started 2018, it officially ended August of 2023. So we're right now closing things out. But it's been a good lesson in what can happen when you begin an innovation process. The beauty of this grant in particular, if you remember, Joe, was it was an innovation grant. They did ask for innovation, for you to think outside the box with your ideas for HIV self-testing. And so we were able to do that. But for me now, looking back and looking, you know, ahead to the future, to be able to see that work range, not just from for Youth by Youth, but to the other work we do these days with for girls and women, to the other work we do with music for health, to the other work we do with for communities. This is what I mean by seeing impact over time, right? So most people who do for Youth by Youth and call it a day and not think of all the other ways they're iterating their work, making it timeless so that other aspects of it can occur in other realms. And so for us, if for Youth by Youth was the main thing, right, we've been able to expand it to really think of other things or other ways of being new when it comes to cervical cancer, other ways of being new and learning when it comes to music. I mean, you take music, something ubiquitous as music, as you know, we take it for granted that it can also be an avenue through which we learn how to do better for our health. Again, so that's what we're doing here, you know, trying to think through, you know, what else is new for the field that we can build off of the lessons of for Youth by Youth, but learn again with something else, whether it be cancer, whether it be blood pressure and stroke, or maybe even with the context, right, in which we're working with, the impact at the community level, and say it, right, not just as an afterthought from the beginning in terms of the work we do for communities. And that's what happens when you think through the life cycle of your journey, not just as a one-time point thing, but something that changes over time. And it does take partnerships, right? If you think of those drivers, it does take collaboration. It does take paying attention to grand challenges, almost like what we said, you know, it does take, you know, being sensitive to the fact that RFAs are not being sensitive to the fact that yes, you can write grants that are focused on your ideas. I am all for it. Focus on the one you care about. You know, if you met me when I was 18, I was very passionate about female genital mutilation. I still am. But there were no RFAs for it. So yeah, you can focus on your idea and hold on to it and go that route, or you can adapt and adjust to what are the global challenges of the time. What network should I be collaborating with? You know, like I said, with Joe, it was me and him coming together as partners, and then me, him, and Dr. Oliver Ezechi as partners to really create this iTest project, doing that with value, doing that with the end user in mind, willingness to learn from them, willingness to learn from our success and failures, even to go from the process of iTest, even to go from the process of iTest to all these, there are a bunch of failures in between too that that are part of our story. And of course, people will only see the success, but in between for you to and access, there's a failure here, there's a failure here. Those are things you don't see, but it's part of that journey, right, towards innovation over time. And so what are the lessons learned in my last 10 minutes? Think different. This is an apple. This is also an apple, like I always say. So what are you doing? Is it new? Is it different? If it's not new, if it's not different, if it's not telling a journey over time, then you kind of may be wasting time. And so always think new, think different. Timeless. I think, if you see the evolution of phones, many of our children, we never know what it's like to have a landline. I still remember my family home and our landline and our first phone number. And many of them would never see that progression over time. But that is innovation over time, right? That it's an enduring collective process of learning over time to get better at the thing that you're doing. So be timeless with the learning that you're going to occur. And really, when you think of it in short, clean ways, it becomes easy to see that progression over time. And then another one is, what did I miss? No, that's it. And so then maybe in conclusion, and I'll open it up for question. And this idea of word work, the work you do, especially as you write out your grants, the work you do ought to be sublime. Let it be something that is generative. Let it be something that secures meaning in the types of difference, in our difference, right, as humans, as just who we are, because, there's no other person that's going to tell the story of the work we're going to do, whether it be creative, whether it be innovative. And almost all of you have urgent questions that are staked, including the ones that you want to ask, but you don't even know where to begin. I think when you think of the innovation of that work, when you think of the vision around that work, like I said, innovation is something that as you're creating it, even you yourself are being created in the moment. And so keep that in mind as you think through some of the work you're thinking of for your innovation. So questions. I'm going to pause there now and ask you all for your questions.
Thanks, Juliet. That was great. That was fantastic. I think this is the other question that I have is it's a little bit of a peering into the future. As you probably know, the US NIH is going to be doing a very different selection criteria moving forward. And it's going to be sort of like, can we do it? And should we do it? It's sort of like asking two very simple questions. And that'll be the new, it'll be a slightly different format starting in January of 2025, I think. In anticipating that new format, do you think that innovation is still going to be a separate section, or what's your peering into the crystal ball? What are your thoughts on what this is going to look like moving forward?
I've been curious too about that format, partly because I want to believe they know they've wasted a lot of money doing research that led to nothing. And so research waste is a big deal. Research waste in the form of work that doesn't last, so work that isn't sustainable, work that doesn't have impact. And so I want to believe as they're thinking through that new review process, is this something new? I think would always be that question. And is it something that we should even consider? I think innovation will still remain, because it's of no use trying to do work that isn't going to push the needle for the field a little bit beyond where it is. It will take time for even that innovation, as much as, NIH wants to be simple and keep it clean. The people reviewing are still humans. So just even that learning curve will be there for a moment before they fully adjust to it. But I want to believe that if you cannot answer what makes this work new, right? If you cannot answer what makes it urgent, if you cannot answer its potential impact, then it isn't new. And so you should keep that in mind. And when I thought about the lessons learned, really, one of my slides that dropped off was really impact. The fact that you really if you remember nothing at all about innovation, think always about your impact, not for yourself, because I know we've been trained to think often about ourselves and what needs to go into our CV, but truly for the people you want to make a difference in your lives, the societies, the systems you're working in. Think of the impact for them, because I think that portion of the grant world will remain.
Thanks, Juliet. That's great. And I agree with you. I think it's always going to be there. Like, new format, old format. It's going to be an important piece. Yeah. Any other questions for Professor Irwinmore in the Q&A box? Well, this was fantastic. Thank you so much again. Innovation is so important, and I think you're right. This is an area that there's a ton of waste, and how do you find something really truly new and explain it concisely? There's so much of an art to it. Yeah, this was helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Bye.
Have a good day. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. See you next
Bye-bye.
week.
Did you leave do I give my email just in case people were curious? Or I guess if you have questions and I don't happen to have answered it, for those of you that are still available, feel free to send me questions you may have overall. All right. Thank you and have a good one.